Welcome to Psychologist Talks. On today's episode, I'm shooting another on AI, and this time I'm trying to peer behind the curtain more. I've got some episodes kind of challenging AI about its knowledge base. Also, probably most linked to this is using it for quote unquote AI therapy, which, full disclaimer, I'm not a huge fan of. We can use it for mental health related support, but full blown therapy is probably not a go to, and hopefully, this episode really illustrates why that is dangerous and if you really need to, what you should be mindful of going into it. So I'm going to share the screen here now. Full disclosure, I shifted over to Claude, much like a lot of people. I'm not going to go into the reasons, but basically just didn't want to be dealing with ChatGPT anymore, and so moved over to Claude. And this is my first ever chat with it. There's no history, there's no memory. This is literally the first interaction it has with me. If you're curious why I'm disclaiming that, well, I don't want you to think that there's more going into this conversation than you're actually getting to see. This is literally it. There's nothing more to it. And so everything you're going to see, how it responds to me, is based only on what I'm offering it right now. Now, I first ask just about like, hey, how are you different? Because I did not go into this chat thinking of developing this episode. It came based on how the episode ended. And so I basically was like, hey, here's some context, here's some history. And yes, full disclosure, I'm not using it as Dr. Google, as we like to say, but I do indeed go, is this normal? What should I be? AI has proven to be a very helpful resource, collating resources around, raising a kid. Google was helpful, yes, but AI has proven to be particularly helpful so long as you're checking its sources. Now, I'm going to, you're welcome to pause this if you're watching it and actually read through the entire thing. I'm going to try to narrow focus on the most interesting pieces. So here's the most interesting piece to its spontaneous response. Now I said like, hey, you can source things from the internet around this, and this is likely what it's doing, and it catches. Let me move this a little bit so I can see here. It correctly catches like, hey, Claude isn't going to flatter you. And I didn't ask for this, right? Like, you're not going to be as over validating as ChatGPT is, right? It just spontaneously says, hey, ChatGPT became increasingly sycophantic, constantly validating everything. And if you watch or listen to my AI therapy episode, which is using an older school version of ChatGPT, 100% that was my primary critique. Talk about daily message limits and those sorts of things, and all these kind of helpful, heads up. Now, I speak to AI in a conversational format, and you'll see me kind of talk more about this as time goes, or as this conversation transpires. And I say, hey, I'm already enjoying this less validating approach. Speaking of, I did an episode on AI therapy, and my brain's going like, does that mean I maybe couldn't do this episode with you to compare and contrast ChatGPT versus Claude? Like, are you basically saying I can't, or is it just like, is it basically viable? And it says, now here's the first hint of like, it might not be excessively validating, but it's already validating. So here you go, right? This is a genuinely interesting question. So if I pause the progress here of the chat just to reflect for a moment, this is where, the self-reflective process as a user becomes really important, because the question here is, am I asking a genuinely interesting question, and is there objective analysis around that? Or is this that quote unquote personality overlay where it is suggesting that this is somehow, forgive me, I'm getting mixed up. Is this objectively based on analysis that this could be an interesting and unique question, or is this just validating me? I don't know. I would have to pause and ask it this at this juncture. Anyway, stop the pause, zoom back in. Here we go. It says, hey, it's going to be different. It could potentially work well. And it just is like, what would this look like? If you give me more information, maybe I could be more specific on the ins and outs. Now, this is where I start going like, well, I don't want to unduly influence you because I know how you work, essentially. Full disclosure, though, me also forgetting that, like, if I turn memory off, this wouldn't be an issue. So why am I asking it this question? But either way, for what it's worth, I go, hey, I have memory turned on. If I answer this, I don't want that to unduly influence you, but just, well, if I leave this as like a hanging question, then that could technically potentially influence you too. Oh, geez, like, do I just delete this whole chat to fix this problem if I've got memory turned on? And it says like, hey, look, once again, a little bit of validation here. You're thinking about this really carefully. It's legitimate, but probably more manageable than it feels. And says like, look, it's not going to be that big of a deal. And you can prompt me in a way that's helpful. This is when deletion would make sense. And here's where it really gets kind of interesting and starts steering things. It says the meta irony of a psychologist worrying about what their AI quote unquote knows about them. Here, let me highlight this if you're watching. is about them is not lost on me. You'd probably have thoughts about that in a different context. Like, oh, snap. It's like interesting. And again, no prompt whatsoever here. I did not guide it down this path. So this is fascinating. It does say it's more conversational or in the first prompt, but I go, all right, let's spar a little bit. Let's do this. Like, interesting you see that as irony when I see it as trying to be planful and intentional. Like, let's think about this. Like, if I'm shooting an episode that's supposed to be accessible to the average Joe, that's not meant to be insulting, right? But not everybody's a psychologist. Like, I don't want it to be artificial. So this isn't about me, right? It would be about the prospective viewer. I don't want to skew something, so help me out here. It's like, hey, fair correction. Irony was a lazy word. This is fascinating. It says that it's a lazy word choice that flattens something that's actually methodologically sound. Now, is it capitulating because I pushed back and this is a personality overlay, or is there really something objective to it? I mean, I would argue there's at least some degree of objectivity to what I just offered it. But again, like, this is this sort of self-reflective process that we should be asking ourselves that we can't necessarily, we'll get to it, engage terribly well with AI. It says, hey, look, you can do, this is just practicality stuff. You can do incognito if you want to. And I said, yeah, so I can do that and I don't have to wipe anything. It's like, yeah, you're good to go. You're good to go. So then I say, awesome, thanks for that. Now, this is where I'm also reflecting on, like, I have this tendency to respond to it relationally. And I noticed me doing that, and I almost didn't send it and just left it there. And I was like, you know what, let me ask a question about this. Ignoring ethical dilemmas of energy usage, this whole pleasantry thing. Do you have any data on that? And this was fun. It's like, back in 2024, 67% of people did. This is the real gem right here. While 12% did it to hedge their bets in case of an AI uprising. I would be lying if there was not a little component of that when I first was engaging in AI. 2025, that actually decreased. That, the United States, along with some Scandinavian countries, interestingly enough, rarely are engaging in that way, that sort of more polite way. And then it says, like, the framing it sticks with me is it talks about, like, the Microsoft designer talking about, like, it sets the tone for the response, and what about habitual patterns we're reinforcing, and so it's kind of like adding a little bit of extra, and so I reflect on that, like, hey, super fascinating. I almost talked about how I can't turn this part of me off and how there might be something natural and useful. And if not just that, I would also argue not just like the tone components, but also it opens doors for greater conversation. I mean, think about it. I almost would have let this chat die here if you didn't add these things. And then I, tangent a little bit about, like, straight up, if we went to artificial general intelligence, this is like adaptive, like it doesn't require, it's not data analyzing, it's actually learning and growing on its own. It'd scare me a little bit if it didn't know how to be curious. And it says, like, wow, that's a genuinely sharp observation. Objective or subjective? I don't know. We're going to get to this soon enough. And it talks about, like, not knowing and all this other stuff. What strikes me about this conversation is that your transparency didn't just shape the dialogue. It also kept testing whether I'd meet it or flatten it. That's not something most people consciously do. It's a more sophisticated way of probing the system. Now, again, I've talked a lot about this sort of validating. What really was interesting to me is this statement down here, juxtaposed by something I just skipped past, which is like, I'll be honest rather than perform modesty about curiosity. What I do is pattern match based on subtext and follow threads that seem generative. Whether that constitutes curiosity in any meaningful sense, don't know. And I don't know if I'm the right person to adjudicate that. So I'm like, well, hold on a second. You just said you pattern match, and then you're talking about how sophisticated I am in probing. meta question time. And here's like the key critical. If I'll put a little timestamp. If you didn't watch the whole thing, at least I hope this is probably the most generative part to watch or listen to. So you mentioning this whole sophisticated manner of interfacing, is this like a more subjective or objective analysis of generative paths? Are you mirroring and encouraging what I pull for, or is this based on more objective analysis? Honest answer, it's probably both. And most importantly, what it's saying, I can't fully disentangle them, which is itself the more truthful response than confident in claiming one or the other. The objective part, there are ways in which I engaged it to suggest maybe there is a little bit of sophistication to how I'm engaging. However, you've also signaled throughout, through framing and transparency, what kind of interlocutor, a totally new word to me, you want. I'm not immune to that signal. A system trained on human interaction learns that certain people in certain modes respond well to being reflected back at a particular register. So it is learning you and responding in kind. So when it gets murky, I don't have, we already alluded to this earlier, I don't have reliable introspective access to my own process. Whether I offer that observation about your sophistication, I can't tell you whether it emerged from pattern recognition on actual conversational data or from a trained tendency to reward engagement with engagement. This is one of the big critiques of AI. And here, Claude earlier was saying, probably just resourcing the web, hey, I'm not like ChatGPT, but here, at the end of the day, it's admitting, while it could be better at not constantly validating, it is still hit by this. It is still subject to this. What I flag for you as a psychologist in the room, not whether or not AI can do therapy, but can AI accurately report on its own processes? Because a therapist who can't distinguish their countertransference from the clinical observation is a compromised one. And I mean, touche to it. Well done, as I say, somewhat infantilizing, but it's just like, absolutely. I mean, it is hard for therapists to do this. This is where you can see my episode on validation therapists. There's tons of therapists that are guilty of the very thing that we're accusing AI of doing. And it takes a lot of work to manage one's own countertransference and parse these things out. And AI is basically admitting, I can't do that for you. I can't do that for you. And so if you're doing this more kind of emotion-focused work or identity-focused work, this is going to be a big factor in what you are gaining from AI. A truly trained, well-trained provider that uses these, what I call them, kind of relational components of psychotherapy will be able to use all of this in the room with you to help you feel yourself out more authentically than AI ever can, than AI ever can. And it is admitting that, but it only admitted it when I prompted it. So to round this episode out, the question I then ask it, and this is it, I say, okay, are there ways in which you can be prompted to mitigate, if not eliminate this? And it basically says, yeah, sort of, but not really. And that's another key and critical point. So I'll just read it out here. You can immediately shift the output by explicitly instructing me to steelman disagreement, flag whether I'm uncertain versus confident, or note when I'm pattern matching on what you seem to want versus what the data in the conversation supports. It gives an example here. What prompting can't fix, the deeper issue, once again, it's repeating itself very importantly, I have no reliable read on my generative process as it's happening. Even if I'm instructed to flag mirroring, I can only flag what I can quote unquote see, and the pull for dynamic may operate below that threshold. It's not unlike asking someone with a blind spot to describe what's in it. The instruction is sincere, but the access isn't there. So, I mean, I can't think of a more commanding sort of pull back of the curtain that if you're going to use this interpersonally, if you're going to use this for identity and learning about yourself, or let's just say all of that is basically a stand-in for what really good therapy is known for, be careful. Be careful. And if you are hell-bent on doing it, be discerning and poke at it periodically to see if it can access and analyze what it's been doing with you thus far. I know that might be less rewarding. I know that could feel a little bit less validating because it feels good when it's saying, wow, that's really insightful, good job, all this stuff. But but if you want the truth, you got to go looking for it. So hopefully it was interesting and insightful to some degree. I found it highly interesting. I did not plan to land here, but when I landed here, I was like, holy moly, this feels really important. So if you stuck with me for these 15 minutes and watched the whole thing, again, the evolution of the conversation that landed us upon this really powerful point, thank you for listening and watching to that whole thing. Worst case, I hope you've at least shot forward to that final point. Because I think it's something that, I know a lot of people are aware of, but I think more people need to be aware of because AI is not going away anytime soon. So stay tuned. I do aim to do a therapy episode with Claude to see how it performs. Does it really stand up to the test that it's somehow better than ChatGPT when it comes to this personality overlay that it itself just said, hey, I might not do as good of a job as I think I'm doing. So stay tuned for that. I'm not sure what I'm doing. But again, as always, thank you for listening and watching, and stay curious.